EQ cannot fix a time problem, and most acoustic problems are time problems. When you've got a resonance boost, like say, in a small room, maybe excessive energy at like 55 hertz, sometimes EQ is really good to just lower the energy a little bit. So maybe it doesn't hang on quite as long. You're not really fixing the time problem. Maybe you're not exciting the room quite as much. When you have a dip, you can't fix that with EQ because it's cancellation.
There are a few scary trends going on YouTube lately, and by scary I mean people peddling some misinformation that could be dangerous, especially for newbies. And I will address them in different videos, but in this video I'm gonna talk about flat response. Many of you guys linked me a bunch of videos from different people in which they were saying that you don't need a flat response in your room, that you don't need flat monitors, none of that. And in short, their reasoning was because you will eventually get used to your room, to your monitors, to all the issues and problems that you can possibly have in your control room. And so you might as well save time, money, and effort, because at the end of the day, even if you had a flat room and a flat response, you would spend the same amount of time learning that than learning your room with all the problems. And of course, I got a couple of things to say about it. So let's talk about this in this video. Hello everyone, welcome back to McSolaar TV. Hope you guys are having a great day. Before we start, check the info box down below for free plugins, special discounts, offers, and go to the new website MixPlusTV.com to book mix and mastering with me, private lessons, mix consultations, and all the other services. And if you want to access the exclusive videos here on YouTube, click the join button, become a MixPlus TV member, get all the perks. And if the videos are helping you, please consider using the super thanks or grab some merch. Let's get to the video. All right, let me start by saying that I don't completely disagree with the premise of this video, right? No matter how flat your room is, no matter how flat your monitors are, you will need time to know your system, your monitoring system, okay? That is a given. But I only partially agree with that because my reasoning is a little bit deeper and logical than the you don't need anything and the dismissive attitude that many YouTubers have nowadays, unfortunately. And I'm gonna digress for a second. When I see people on YouTube taking the dismissive route, you don't need anything, right? And everything is a scam, everything is BS. I either give them the benefit of the doubt and I think they are not being malicious and they mean well, but they just honestly don't know better, or they do it for views, because on YouTube nowadays, unfortunately, controversy works very well. It'll give you views, it will give you comment, whether are positive or negative, and it will get people to like you. When you take the dismissive route, don't need anything, don't need speakers, don't need a good room, don't need analog, don't need anything, the people who can't get their dream studio or their dream equipment right away, right here, right now, they look for validation. They look for someone who tells them, yes, you don't need them. And so ultimately is one way to get people to like you. They're doing these people a disservice most of the time, giving them false expectations, as opposed to maybe someone like me that tells you things how they are, which is not necessarily what most people want to hear, but won't give you false expectation. But this is a subject for another video. End of digression. Now, my thought on the flat response subject, and my thought is, yes, it has been slightly overblown and overrated, we can say, a little bit by marketing, but that's the case for everything, not just in the audio world. But it is important to have a flat monitoring system. Yes, it is important. Does it have to be as flat as a pancake? No, it doesn't. And here's why. Number one, because we all hear things differently, different ears, different taste. Our brain that process things even so slightly different. In fact, if you get 10 people to take a hearing test, I promise you, you will have 10 different results. And that means even if we were to sit in an absolutely perfectly flat environment, we wouldn't hear flat. Now, unless we have some medical problem to our ears, there won't be a 6 dB dip or bump in our hearing, but we will hear things slightly different. Number two, because it's extremely difficult to actually have a perfectly flat response. And many flat rooms out there, they have that level of perfection for one pair of speakers. And many rooms have multiple, 2, 3, 4. Number three, because realistically, the sweet spot where things would be perfectly flat is a sweet spot. So it's a fairly narrow space. This is just physics. So if you reach or if you move on one side versus the other, you won't have that perfectly flat response anymore. Number 4, because in real life, ear fatigue plays a role. And I'm not just talking about a mixing session where as you go, you lose the top end and you get ear fatigue, but also what you did before going into the mixing room. And many professional engineers have a pretty consistent routine and schedule, but again, life happens, and even a longer trip in the car will change slightly the response and how fatigued you already get in the room. Number 5, because the response of your system will change with volume. And yes, of course, most engineers use a preset, but realistically, we mix and master at different levels. So that will also change the perception. Number 6, because 99% of monitors out there are simply not flat. And I'm talking about perfectly flat, because the difference that I'm making here is being obsessive about having a totally perfectly flat response versus having an absolute mess of a room with horrible monitors in it. There's a lot in between. Number 7, because believe it or not, even in rooms that are professionally designed and built and then tuned to be flat, many engineers will change that flat tune to their taste. They will slightly want a little more bass, a little more top end, a little less top end. That's, for example, how I like it. I prefer my system to be a little chubby at the bottom and not to have super focused, hyped top end. And there are several reasons as to why engineers slightly change the tune of their room. One is personal taste. 2 is because a flat room, if you ever mix in a really actually flat room, is extremely unexciting. And so if you're not engaged when you mix music and when you work on music, you're also probably not going to perform as well. You're going to get bored. You're never going to get excited. You're never going to get into it. So many engineers tune their rooms to their taste. Also, maybe they are used to other rooms they've been working on before, or they are used to their car system, or they are used to other media where they listen to music for a long time, or they've been listening music for a long time, and they kind of want to tailor or have the same feeling in their mixing room. But, and here's the discrepancy, are all these reasons and qualifiers enough to come to the conclusion then, well, then screw the flat response and screw the treatment or monitors or whatever, I'm just gonna mix and get used to however my room is? Absolutely not. That is either a really naive or unexperienced or just plain stupid thought process. It would be like trying to paint with psychedelic glasses on with a canvas that instead of being white has a bunch of colors splatter all over. And you're gonna say, well, I'm gonna work around it. It's gonna work the same if I didn't have the glasses and I had a white canvas. That is absolutely nonsensical. It's nonsensical because imagine the time, the effort, the trial and error that you would get to get used to a room with 6, 10 dB dips and bumps, but that's not the only thing. Lingering frequencies, flutter echoes, and who knows what else. First of all, your learning curve, your trial and error would be probably 100 times longer. And mixing and mastering is already a long learning curve. That's why many engineers reach maturity when they are a certain age, because it's years long. The idea of starting from a deficit to go into something like this, it's unthinkable. Like, why would you do it? And here I think is where I should put the insert and the context. The difference between wanting to be or being a professional mixer mastering engineer with clients working for other people versus you working on your own music only. Or just like many of these YouTubers that peddle this kind of ideas, working and being able to work only on one specific genre versus a well-rounded engineer that can work on many different genres. And one thing I noticed, no offense, those engineers tend to do one type of mix. They kind of make everybody sound the same with very slight differences, which is totally fine. There's many successful engineers that operate that way. Good for them. I personally don't like it, but I see how it's somewhat easier, because think about it, if you only do hip hop, you will never have to deal with electric guitars, right? Same if you do only metal, you will not probably have to deal with things that are in hip hop and vice versa. Okay, so this is something that we have to put into context. If you marry that thought that because of various reasons, at the end of the day, you need to spend time learning your system, then might as well throw everything out of the window, you will be very, very, very unhappy with your mixes for a long time. Now, even though I said most monitors are not flat, even though I said it's extremely hard to get a room to sound flat and all that I said earlier, is it possible to get a room to sound flat? Absolutely yes. There's plenty professionals out there, my room was built by one, that can get a room perfectly flat. It's very expensive. It requires a lot of real estate because you'll probably have to eat out 2, 3, 4 feet for each wall to get something like that. And nowadays we also have amazing digital aids and software and new studies up to date, more accurate method of measuring. So it is 100% possible. It's not easy, but it's very much possible. What I am somewhat, we can say, debating is I would probably stop or be happy at 80% of flatness, so to speak. However you want this to translate either in a graphic or in a waterfall, as opposed to chase that final 10 or 15, 20% of flatness when I know I am probably gonna tune the room anyway to my taste. And like I said, it will still take time to learn the new system and the room. But the difference between my logic and my advice and these people advice is I'm telling you, no, you should 100% get the best monitoring you can afford and then the best room treatment that you can afford to get your room reasonably flat, to get to a point where you can trust your room. You don't have to go and do 5 trips to the car or listen to your mix in 10 different medias because it translates here, but it doesn't translate here. You lose the guitar on the phone and on the laptop are too high. The low end is too much in the car and too little on the other system. All these things happens when you don't have a room that you can trust, that you know, and that is somewhat reasonably flat. And here the technical bit. Every single time that I've seen someone debating or questioning whether or not you should care about a flat response, they always and only show the static EQ response. Typical measurements in the room with the software, microphones in one place or multiple places, there's a dip, there's a bump, I'm gonna either get used to it or EQ it out. And I'm about to talk about how EQ cannot be the solution for that. But what I wanna say here is this, they never mention the waterfall, they never mention the decay, they never show the spectrogram. The graphs that show you how long the frequencies take to decay, how long they linger in the room. The spectrogram of a room is at least half of the equation. And you don't have to take my words as trust me blindly. I'm actually gonna play bits and pieces of a really, really good video by Geek Acoustic. They did a masterclass at Blackbird Studio, and I highly advise to go and watch the whole video. I'll put the link down below because it's a gold mine of information and it's out there for free, so definitely don't miss it. Let's watch the first clip.
The spectrogram is a little different from frequency response graph. We still have frequency on the x-axis left to right, but level, instead of on the y-axis, level is depicted in color, okay? I think of this as the view from 30,000 feet of what your room is doing. So the reds down there in the low end, those are the loudest points, so the level's in color. Whereas the deep blues, that's just barely above the noise floor. The y-axis now, instead of level, is decay time. How long does it take that frequency to decay in the room? And that's a very, very, very big part of the challenges we have to overcome. Do you guys see this little black line, squiggly graph there? That is the peak energy curve. In other words, when is the sound at that frequency loudest after it's excited? Here at 90, that's about 100 milliseconds. That means when that kick drum hits, 100 milliseconds later, it's loudest. You hear that resonance. So it's like, you know what I mean?
All right, so that's very interesting, and it should already open your mind to how the static EQ frequency response with the regular measuring is only part of the room. And as you can see here, some problems, and we'll take a look at another clip, are time-based. They are not EQ-based. And he does the example here of a kick drum hitting in 100 hertz coming X milliseconds after. You know how hard it is to get used to something like that? And how stupid it is to wanting to get used to something like that instead of, if you are serious about your music or your career as an engineer, fix the problem and having an immediate good response that you can gauge and trust when you send your mixes out. Let's take a look at another clip.
EQ cannot fix a time problem, and most acoustic problems are time problems. When you've got a resonance boost, like say, in a small room, maybe excessive energy at like 55 hertz, sometimes EQ is really good to just lower the energy a little bit. So maybe it doesn't hang on quite as long. You're not really fixing the time problem. Maybe you're not exciting the room quite as much. When you have a dip, you can't fix that with EQ because it's cancellation. If I've got a dip at, 120 hertz, very common, SBIR kind of a thing. Sorry, speaker boundary interference response. It's a common thing that has to do with the fact that that speaker is just far enough away from the front wall and sound comes out of the speaker and some of it wraps around the back, hits the front wall, and it gets there later, just like James was talking about earlier. So now you've just created this big cancellation because those things are intersecting in a way phase-wise that reduces the energy at that particular frequency. If you keep adding EQ, all you're doing is driving the amp harder and driving the speaker harder with no change. EQ's good for tonal shaping. Like if you just got monitors, maybe they're bigger monitors and you're sitting 3 feet away from them, so they're a little hard sounding. Maybe you want to smooth them out. But when it comes to the bass, you can't do much more than shaping with EQ. And you cannot, I repeat, you cannot fix time problems with EQ. People, it's kind of the problem with, most EQ-based room correction software. It's just, you just can't. It's a physical thing.
All right. So this is, along with the waterfall and the spectrogram, another important concept to understand. If you have a dip, you can't EQ that back in, right? When, as he says, if you have a bump, it's easier to attenuate that. But this is all part of the bigger concept that is the subject of this video. Imagine to try to get used to something like this, to a dip that you can't even fix with EQ. How many variables, how many times you have to pick up before you get it right and before you have consistent delivery of your mixes. And again, this is much easier if you only do one genre. It's much easier. But if your client base spans from reggae to death metal, like it happens for me, that becomes a problem. It becomes a big problem. And even if you're working on your own music, like unless you do one song and repeat it for your entire career, there are even slight changes. What people say details don't matter, well, that's the difference between successful people and not successful people, is details. They matter. If you think details don't matter, you shouldn't mix. If you think details don't matter, I don't think this is the environment for you, because mixing and mastering especially is all about details.
Have a room and you just put up a load of 1-inch pyramid foam and you just cover all of the surfaces. All the first reflections in the high and mids, maybe the higher side of the mids, are going to be dealt with. But the only problem with that, it's kind of like turning the bass control up on your hi-fi. Now you have an overemphasized bass and you have even more of a muddy, boxy room than you did to begin with.
All right, this last bit was somewhat related to this. It's more related to Rate My Studio series, when I take a look at your rooms, guys, and I give you advices on positioning, treatment, equipment, blah, 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 blah. But in those videos, you probably saw me 5 times out of 10 telling people, do not use the freaking foam. Do not put foam everywhere, because that's kind of what happens. It only takes care and it only blunts the top end of the high mid frequency and does absolutely nothing for what are the actual problems in rooms, and small rooms in particular, which is the low end specifically and low mids and everything else. So these are the reasoning as to why I think, this is just my opinion, it's, I want to say, in the best case scenario, naive to tell people don't bother. Flat response doesn't matter, treatment doesn't matter, monitors doesn't matter. People will listen to your music on phones. This one drives me crazy. This means you absolutely do not understand how to mix or master, or why it's even more important to have the best mix and the best master you can possibly get, because people will abuse your song, because people will listen to small speakers, to phones, to laptops. Which mix do you think is gonna hold up better? The best mix you can possibly get, where all the details are taken care of, or the mix that is just, well, fuck it, they're gonna listen to it on poor system, so I'm just gonna, do whatever. Which one is gonna translate more consistently on all these horrible media? That is one thought process that I can't wrap my head around, how people who try to teach music production or engineering or whatever it is, or this is mostly a YouTube thing, they can't even say something like that with a straight face. Either they really don't understand, or I don't have an answer. But the point is, again, I think it's either quite naive to advise people to just forget it, and in the worst case scenario is really, really counterproductive. Is gonna make people question their skills or the way they learn things or their sources or their music, their production skills. They're gonna make them question everything. Because here's the thing, this happened to me. I speak from personal experience because I started somewhere. Like everybody else, I didn't start here. I didn't have all this. And so I went through it all and I made those mistakes. Even the time that you take to learn a system, when a system is good and you can trust it, the learning curve is a lot shorter than the whatever is going on, I'm gonna get used to it and get it right eventually. And yeah, I think this is this is it for this video. I will do probably another couple of videos because, like I said earlier, there's this trend on YouTube going on right now, and I think it's mostly for clout and views, where there's this dismissive attitude, and I think it's kind of dangerous because, one, we are losing greatness, we are losing quality, we are losing the good. And it's true that a Prius will take you to the store just like a Lamborghini will, but they're not the same car. And I really wish music and engineering to keep being great and aim for greatness and not normalize low bar and normalize the good enough, it's okay. And I see now a lot of videos aiming in that direction because, like I said, you're telling them what they want to hear as opposed to what the truth is and what they should hear. But these are all subjects for other videos. This is it for this one. If you liked it, please don't forget to leave a like, comment down below, let me know what you think. Don't miss the next video, so subscribe if you haven't already. Click the notification bell because YouTube doesn't notify anybody. Go to the website mixbystv.com to book mix and mastering with me, mix consultations, private lessons, and all the other services. In there you will also find all the mix and mastering courses. Click the join button, become a MixBuzTV member if you want to access the exclusive videos here on YouTube. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. Stay safe. See you next time.
Hands on my